Spectrovision Radio.
Thomas Hart's uncle was coming home late from out courting this night, and it was a bright night and the moon was high in the sky. Outside his house was a green flag, so he was a noble family, one of the ancient Irish family. When he was coming in near his home, didn't he see a woman on the green flag? He thought it was some neighbouring woman that was there, and that she was trying to knock a start out of him. Over he goes, and he clapped his hand on her shoulder. The very minute he did, God bless us and save us all, and may everyone be well where it is told. She raised her hand and caught him by the crown of the head and lifted him clear off up the road. And she hit him down against the ground again, but she didn't kill him. He got a terrible fright, and may God bless us and save us all. When he got up in the morning, the print of her 5 fingers was on the top of his head, and his hair had turned as white as the snow from the dent of the fright.
They claim that our eyes will just be created a slightly different from what they are. We talk, we see things are not normal.
Welcome to Strange Familiars. Happy Halloween, Allison.
Happy Halloween, Tim. Happy anniversary.
Oh, yeah. Happy anniversary. This is our year anniversary.
7,527th anniversary.
Yeah, it's we got married a long time ago. I was talking to Bricks. They knew I was married.
But not to me necessarily.
They didn't put it together that it was to you. Finally, they put it together and like, oh, that makes sense.
I'm sorry that we don't exude, like, coupleness. That has happened recently. Somebody thought we were brother and sister.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah, we're at another, a postcard show or something.
Yeah. I guess maybe I should hold your hand more often.
Well, happy Hallowversary. And happy Halloween to all the listeners. Happy to do this bonus show. And it's a nice show, too, because Brother Richard is here, and he's going to be talking about banshees and death omens. And we talk a little bit about some Halloween traditions, and I have some other questions for him, but it's a fun one. Get some Banshee lore. Before we get to that, though, I want to mention Kaya.life, and that is the group that we are supporting on Pine Ridge Reservation. They are a group that is on the reservation. They're not an outside group. They're right there, and now would be a great time to help. The way things are, funding for a lot of stuff has been cut, and they could use our help. So I just want to remind everybody again, Kaya.life, if you can help, please do. And thanks to everyone who has. All right, I guess without further ado, let's get to this talk with Brother Richard. I'd like to welcome Brother Richard back to Strange Familiars. How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me back once again.
Thanks for coming back. International traveler, Brother Richard.
Yes, fresh off the plane from Rome. Over with the brothers there. Somebody saw that King Charles was meeting the Pope and sent me a message to know, had I anything to do with that meeting? So I said, I certainly do not run in circles. We had a meeting of our own brothers in a little monastery way up above Rome. So all of the big stuff was happening down in the city, and we were just keeping vigil from above. So that was us.
Allison asked the same. She said, Brother
Yeah.
Richard there because the king's there. I said, I don't think so, but I don't know.
I certainly don't run in those circles. Yeah.
I said, because she said it. Oh, I think she said it like, oh, I think Brother Richard's there because of the king or something like that. I said, well, did you see him in the crowd or something? Like, like from the pictures? She said, no. I thought she had picked you out of the crowd.
But no, there was no invitation there.
Well, I got to say, so far, I'm very, very happy with our new Pope.
Me too. Yeah, absolutely. He's doing
fantastic.
Seems to be. He is an extraordinary gift, and it's an Augustinian gift for a man who's a doctorate of Augustinian theology, of being able to say a huge amount in very few words, but what he extremely strong and very clear. So yeah.
Very much a man of the people, it seems, which is
yeah,
which is lovely. So happy to have you back for Halloween again. And we're going to be talking about some Banshee stories and death omens. But before we get to that, I put up on Instagram a post about this heavens letter that Allison got me, this Himmelsbrief. It was supposed to have fallen from heaven in Germany, and it was somewhat common for Pennsylvania Dutch people to hang copies of this in the house. Had you ever heard of that before, or anything falling from heaven like that?
So, well, plenty of stuff has been claimed to have fallen from heaven, all right. We even have a very famous monastery here in Dublin, actually, which was dedicated to St. Michael. And the story is that this is back in Celtic times, that the local chieftain didn't want to give the land over. And a stone fell from heaven and hit him on the head, was disputing the handing over of the land. So he duly handed it over, and that stone is supposed to be actually the foundation stone of the monastery ever since. So yeah, whether that was thrown with a deft twist of an arm from some monk standing by, or was actually a meteor or a stone from St. Michael himself, who knows, but it certainly secured the monastery. No doubt. And then I suppose, interestingly, there have been at various times, I suppose, saints and prophets and hermits who have talked about receiving particular instructions or icons or even relics being presented to them from heaven, which would have a parallel actually in the Buddhist tradition with I think they're known as tortons, which are kind of heavenly apports, I suppose you would call them, things that are gifted or given. So most of the traditions would have something like it. Interestingly, we have in the Franciscan lineage, we have what's known as the Brevis Antonianum, which is the brief of St. Anthony, which was a parchment that was delivered to a woman somewhat miraculously by St. Anthony. She was praying to him to be delivered from a particular vexatious spirit that was attacking her and her home and her family, and she prayed to St. Anthony, and a mysterious friar is supposed to have shown up at the house and presented her with a letter from St. Anthony, which was essentially an exorcism blessing, an inscription. It's known as the brevis because it's short, a brief, the same as the piece that you're talking about. And the minute she had it, she was delivered immediately. And so she began to spread word of it, and the local friary got to hear of it, and apparently one of the friars came and asked, could he borrow it? So he borrowed it from her, and unfortunately the vexatious spirit came back into the friary and asked for it back. So he gave it back to her, which once again firmly and finally cured whatever the issue was. But from then on, they distributed copies of it, and it has been very efficacious in protecting people and houses and places. And we still use it to this day as a blessing that's used in kind of minor exorcism. So yeah, I mean, there's a long tradition of those kind of ideas or those things. And I suppose to some extent, it's an argumentum ad auctoritatis. Well, it's definitive authority. It comes from heaven. So therefore, but at the same time, it's also a reminder, I suppose, of the closeness of this world and the next, and a peace, a protective power that can come in this way, and that copying of these texts would go forward. In the Celtic tradition, they had what were known as the battle psalms or the battle psalters. So they were books of scripture, but they were ones that had been calligraphied or copied by very special monastic saints, monks, etc. And they were kept in shrines and would be marched around armies 3 times to bless them before they would go into battle. And one of the oldest, in fact, it is the oldest piece of writing of Gaelic that's not in the old Ogham or Ogham script, that's in actual recognizable letters, is known as the Cathaoich. It's in the National Museum to this day, but it was written by hand by St. Columcille, and it was used to protect his family and his tribe for a very long time. So much so that they didn't even know what was inside the box anymore.
Oh, wow.
And they just a protection kind of amulet that was brought around and about. And when they opened it, it turned out to be a book of Psalms that was written in his hand. So yeah, to this day, it's still there.
Oh, it's so interesting. So there is a precedent for such things.
Yeah. As often happens, these things either, if they vanish, they reappear. I think there's something kind of ubiquitous about the ways in which we deal with the next world or the other world. And then also you have the kind of cultural hegemony that takes place over in the States particularly, where various forms may appear that people would be very surprised and shocked and even scandalized if they discovered that they actually have origins elsewhere.
Sure.
So, that idea.
Yep, Powell's a great example of that.
Yeah.
Actually. And as I was talking with Timothy Grieve Carlson on the previous episode,
I listened to it. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, it's such a Pennsylvania thing. I mean, if you read the powwow books, they're very Catholic, but it becomes this Protestant tradition in Pennsylvania because of the culture of Pennsylvania, I think. It's so interesting.
Yeah. Well, again, denomination is no protector from the ills and problems of human life.
Mm.
And so if you have something that works, you're going to use something that works. Human beings are very good at, I think I've said it before, human beings are very good at forgetting and getting rid of what doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And folklore is held on to because it works, or it's deemed to have worked at least, or seen to have worked at least. So yeah, these practices remain even if denominations and change, and even if their origin is forgotten.
Yeah. Well, as we get to Halloween here, and we'll get to the Banshee stories, I promise. Just one question. I've heard reference because of Samhain. Is Halloween essentially an Irish tradition that has spread, or was this something that was around in other forms in other cultures before?
So I think you have 4 different things that are happening, right? First of all, you have harvest festivals. Okay, so in the Northern Hemisphere, there were harvest festivals celebrated all the way around. As long as there was a harvest festival. And it was a time of great thanksgiving and rejoicing, but it always had this element of looking over one's shoulder at the lean times are coming. There was always that idea of, in some way, that placation of the deities, the gods, or whatever needed to happen in this moment so as to get us through another winter. And this was particularly true in the Northern Hemisphere. And we find it right the way across all of the kind of indigenous traditions, pagan tradition, whatever you want to call them. But the pre-Christian traditions, you will find these. Okay. And Samhain was one particular festival that took place in Ireland. Now, the big issue with all of these festivals, as they are currently in the kind of zeitgeist, is this is a conflation of Victorian understanding along with kind of New Age, neo-pagan revival, okay? So if we go to an anthropologist or historian and say, what do we know about Samhain? We know very, very little about it. The unfortunate thing was the Celts didn't, by and large, write down a huge amount. And the Roman Empire pretty much expunged a huge amount of Celtic record. I'm talking about the pagan Roman Empire now, before ever it came up. So it lingered on in Scotland, Ireland, and Wales particularly. And there it wasn't just a harvest festival, it was an ancestor festival particularly. So there was the idea that this was a time of transition. It's actually the beginning of the Celtic year. So it's kind of a New Year festival as well. And depending on where you go, because often these things were very local, there were various ways of kind of honoring the ancestors, placating the land, giving thanks for the harvest, celebrating, but also a kind of sacrificing to the elemental powers for a new spring. Mm-hmm. So that could be as simple as lights being lit, fires being lit, food offerings. And in some places it was extreme as blood offerings. So the slaughtering of animals and things like that. And as we'd expect, kind of fertility rituals. So that's the first piece, kind of, in fact, the first 2, that's the idea of harvest festivals and then Samhain itself. Mm-hmm. So Iha Hauna is the night before Samhain. So the Celts calculated, like many of the older traditions did, you began the day not at dawn, but you began it when the sun went down the previous evening as such. So the vigil, we would still keep this, for example, in the Christian tradition, like say Christmas Eve and all of that kind of idea, it all begins the night before. And so when that happened, there were a number of different traditions that evolved then. And the idea was that at that time, and maybe 2 or 3 other times during the year, the next world, the other world, and this world were very, very close. And it was a time, the original Celtic time was a time of great fear because the spirits walked the land. There was a curse put on any of the produce that was still in the fields that had been wasted. You weren't supposed to harvest berries or food afterwards because that belonged to the other world.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Now, there's a very practical reason for that, which is by the end of October, insects have now laid their eggs in a lot of the fruit and berries. Mold and fungi has now grown because it's gotten damper and wetter. So it's a very, very safe thing to say. In fact, when we were children, if you saw the grey bloom of fungus over blackberries and things like that were still on the branches, we were told that was fairy spit or puka spit, that they spat on the berries and it would be a curse to take them in those days. They were marking them as their own as such. Mm-hmm. But what you see is this very interesting thing of food, fairy and corruption going together, right? This idea that some way the goodness is removed once it's been offered to the other people. The third kind of thing then is Halloween itself. So where does this come from? So round about 8th century, so around the 700s or so, Pope Gregory the Eighth, I think it was at the time, writes a letter giving permission for what's known as Hallowtide. So in other words, it's a custom already being celebrated across Europe, but the Pope is kind of endorsing it and saying, yeah, there's no problem with this at all. And the idea there was praying for the souls of the dead, particularly. So it's the shortest ecclesial season. It's known as Hallowtide. Begins with All Hallows Eve, which happens to be the same as Samhain, though Samhain being lunar and the Roman year being solar, there's always a slight little wobble between the days, but it's always around the same time. And you have a number of things that took place. The first was a vigil mass that took place to pray for all of the souls of the dead, particularly those who had died in the previous year. Then there was, as there always is, celebration, harvest festival, party, Thanksgiving, and all the rest of it. And two distinct customs came out of this. One was, it was one of the mumming festivals. So it was when people dressed up and went house to house, and they begged for what were known as soul cakes, which were small little cakes of sweet cakes like scones, kind of, that were marked with a cross. And the idea was that the richer the family, the more soul cakes they could give. And because they gave them to the mummers, they were giving them to the mummers in token of prayers to be offered, prayers to be said for the souls of their particular family and dead. And there's all kinds of rhymes that exist to this day in England and Wales and Ireland that are all about the soul cakes. And then that was adults that were doing that. They were mumming and they were going around and having a great time as adults do, dressed up, and, you know, I'm sure there was drink and music and all the rest of it. It was part of that kind of harvest explosion of energy after hard work, very hard work on the land. Then you had, though, that the children would dress up as ghosts and ogres and monsters and devils and demons and all of these things to mock those powers. So the idea was that the Christian has nothing to be afraid of any of these things. And so it was the fun of kind of dressing up and mocking evil, basically saying you have no power at all. And even though this is supposed to be your highest time, we have no issue with you at all. And you have no power over any of us. And then the children would go door to door knocking. And this is where the kind of trick-or-treating stuff eventually came from, because the idea being that if the families could afford to give coins or nuts or fruit or anything like that, they would do that. And if not, then God help the house. You know, and that continues to this day. So you have two distinct things. You have Samhain and you have Halloween. And what's happened really in the last sort of 100 years or so is these two things have kind of combined completely. And you have a retroactive writing back of the Halloween customs into Samhain. And that's fine. That's what people do. Sure. That's how folk or culture evolves and all the rest of it. But it's good for people to know what it was about, because the Hallowtide idea was All Hallows Eve, and the church taught it as well, that this world and the next world are very close together, and we pray for the dead and we think of them. There were very specific customs I've written about before. Things like the house had to be cleaned because the dead come and visit and check out the house that night. Candle was set in the window and the fire was left burning all night so that they would be able to be there. And we would, to this day, I still do it because my grandmother and my mother did it. We would put out bread and salt as food for the holy souls as they would visit the house that night. And usually you would leave the hearth. It wasn't a night that people stayed up for the whole night long. It wasn't a vigil. They would leave the hearth, close over the doors, and let the dead have the house for the night, kind of thing. And in the morning then, the bread was broken up and distributed to the birds, and the salt was scattered over the house and the land because it was now blessed salt, but you weren't allowed to consume it. It was very important that you weren't allowed to consume it. Any visitor who knocked on the door had to be welcomed that night, even if they were a stranger, because they might be a holy soul or a person passing. And we have then the lovely moment that happens of the idea as well of the story circle being really important. So the stories were told, the ghost stories were told, all of that kind of stuff along the way. It was also a night that was considered kind of special for omens and for signs of what was coming for the year. And they were kind of allowed in a way, because it was kind of folk stuff, it was sort of smiled at. And so things like peeling an apple, but having to try and keep the whole skin in one piece. And if you manage that, especially with a silver knife, wherever you got one of those, I don't know. But anyway, with a silver knife and you threw it over your left shoulder, whatever pattern it landed in was the initial of the person you were going to marry. So it was all children's kind of stuff like that. Dropping candle wax into cold water, again, the same thing, looking for those. The apple bobbing, actually, the famous thing of water and apples and bobbing down, was supposed to also, people were supposed to have kind of glimpses of the other world under the water.
Oh.
And again, it was a very important night that you left anything that was to do with fairy side of things, you left them completely alone. So the fairy forts were not disturbed on that night. And any noise or singing or music that was heard, you didn't go look, you left them be. That was their kind of night, because this was the changeover of the two courts as well. This was the night when the Seelie and Unseelie courts change over. So there was a kind of a weariness or a wariness about that. And I suppose finally then you woke up on the 1st of November and you were into the Feast of All Saints. So it was a great celebration. It was a holiday for the farm workers particularly, so a very important day. There was a celebration of Mass. We prayed for all of the saints, and not just the canonized saints. It's a way of honoring all of the saints, all of those who've made it into heaven. And then the following day was All Souls, where you would visit the graveyard, pray for the dead, have masses off for the dead. And most people would take on prayer or penitential practices for the whole month of November. And that was kind of Hallowtide in a nutshell. So Samhain and itself go very closely together. Certainly the Samhain elements, I would say, fed into it. But in terms of looking at Halloween and saying, oh, it's just Samhain Christianized in a way, they were two distinct things that have sort of met, and particularly met in America, I would say, and kind of became one thing now in terms of our sort of common understanding of it. Yeah.
2 notes as to things you said. I love when these things cross the Atlantic or cross cultures or whatever. We have the story of the Butzeman, the scarecrows here. And you were to take them down before Halloween, because they could become animate with a spirit if you left them in the field at that point.
Yeah.
And then another thing, very practically, I was foraging recently, and I had picked a bunch of autumn. There's a very special autumn olive bush in Hex Hollow that has the sweetest autumn olives I've ever tasted. They taste like cherries. I love them. I go there every year, and I pick them. And I'd forgotten this year until very late in the season there was still some on there. And I picked a bunch, and I was very happy with them, and put the remainder in the refrigerator, and I was eating them maybe a week later. I'm eating them, and I noticed, oh, there's a bug. Put that out and then put that away, and then I look in the bag, and it's just, there's bugs everywhere. So it's very much the case with late in the season fruit.
Yeah. It's and again, there was also the idea that a certain amount of fruit and nuts and berries were supposed to be left on the hedgerows and the forest. There was this thing of paying a debt, that if you wanted your land to be rich, you always left a certain amount, the corners, the wild edges, which was as much, by the way, for the poor as it was for the and for the fairies as well. There was this idea that any poor person traveling through your land should be able to reach for an apple. So people were considered extremely stingy if they sort of stripped the hedges. And, that's where one of the great Halloween traditions of the turnip lantern that became the pumpkin lantern over in America. This was his punishment. He had been mean to the poor, stingy Jack, and so traveled on Halloween looking for his head again, or looking for salvation. And these turnip lanterns, which are to this day are the most grotesque things. If you see them, they're really more than the pumpkin, horrifying.
Oh yeah.
But these would be annually put out at the gates to kind of ward off stingy Jack coming into the house. But again, he was being punished for avarice, for keeping stuff back from other. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a rule in foraging that, and depending who you ask, some people say 1 for you, 1 for nature, or 1 for you, 2 for nature. It depends on the person, but you never strip things dry. You always leave.
Absolutely.
And then practical, in a very, very practical sense, you don't want to strip something down and take all the seeds away. You want it to be able to reseed and make more. So
most of these things have very practical, reasons. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about some banshees and death omens.
Yeah, so I suppose this was the time of year for it particularly. So the Banshee, it's Irish, it's Gaelic, Banshee or Banshida is woman of the fairies. So it was from the beginning very, very associated with a particular kind of fairy. And it's very interesting in all of the Banshee tales, most fairy legends will include some element of kind of romance or eros or whatever along that. There is nothing of this in the Banshee. And this is the lady who's often known as the White Lady or the Grey Lady. So it's a supernatural death messenger, often to do with keening or hearing a voice that's either pronounces the name of somebody who's going to die, but more usually a kind of a high wailing that's heard around the house or the dwelling of a family where somebody is going to die. Often associated with the very noble Celtic houses and Celtic families. So it was often said that the Banshee only turned up for people who had O in the name. So like O'Malley or O'Reilly. And the reason for that was because when the Anglicization of Ireland took place, the colonization took place, families that worked with the colonizers often dropped the Celtic prefixes from their name. So they dropped O or they dropped Mac. O traditionally was of the house of, Mac was the son of, and you'd sometimes see as well Ni, N-I, which was daughter of, along the way. So they dropped these names and they were considered kind of turncoats in ways that they, to drop them, to take on the anglicized version of their name was sort of seen as a bit of a betrayal. But the Banshee doesn't seem to reckon with that. If there's a family bloodline that goes right the way back to one of these big houses or big tribal chiefs, then it's seen as a privilege, in fact, that the family is warned about a death that is coming. So even though it might come in a very spooky way or in a very frightening way, it was seen actually as a privilege that in some way your bloodline was so important that a death in your family had an echo in the other world. And so they were coming to warn you about this. Now, you can't avoid it. That's the other thing. Once the omen happens, it was just considered this was happening and that was it. And there's a lot of stories of Irish chiefs and things like that who would hear it before a battle and would still go into battle and all the rest of it, but would know, that's it, I'm not coming out of this, and they would ask for the last rites or the services because they knew they weren't coming out of it. In terms of animal appearance, often associated with what's known as the grey or the hooded crow, the bald, and this was seen as her bird particularly. And I have a very funny connection with that because when I was in Donegal, in our friary up there, where the folklore and especially the fairy lore is very alive still, there was a family of grey crows that lived right beside the friary and I started feeding them. And it got to the point where I could come out and whistle and they would just come down to be fed because crows are crows. And it was only when I was leaving I discovered that this had caused great consternation amongst the people in the area that the new boss up there could call the crows down because they saw a connection to the bald, to the other who were also on the land as well. So I don't know whether I was feeding them or feeding the crows, but anyway, they were intelligent enough that if I didn't turn up, they would actually come to my window and knock on it to kind of say, come on, get yourself out here and feed us, The other element about it as well is that her size is very interesting. So people have this experience if they see her as well as hear her. And it was considered a great privilege to see her, but you were told on no account to touch her. Physically touching her was a complete taboo. So people would have this experience of seeing, was she a tall woman a long way away or was she a small woman close?
Oh,
and they would
interesting.
find to be able to sort of focus or she is. Children, if they saw her, again, you were warned not to touch her. But if they did touch her, they were often granted like second sight or that kind of idea, the connection with that, but that was there. So there was a kindness to children, but not to adults, and especially not to men. There are all kinds of stories of men who reached out to grab her or who thought it was a neighbor mocking them or whatever, and they do not fare well. I can read you one of the accounts in a little while. They're certainly put in their place very, very quickly. And so one of the really interesting things about it is that you have a couple of things that I think are, you'll see the parallels with even some of the lore that you talk about in terms of the Bigfoot lore. When the voice is heard, it's often heard speaking a language, but the people can't quite make out what the words are, right? So it's a keening, wailing, and it's the old tongue. It's known as the old tongue. So it's the tongue of before. It's often felt that different people, you can have three people in a room and they all feel that it's coming from a different direction. And there's often the feeling of don't separate to go and look for it because it's kind of calling you off. If it comes around a house, it will often circle the house 2 or 3 times, 3 particularly, and often people argue over whether clockwise or anti-clockwise. But anyway, that's one of it. And when it does that, you can get rattling and banging in the house when that's going on. And also, probably one of the most interesting things around it as well is that sometimes cracking noises or banging noises will be heard in the house as well when this is going on. And there's a huge association of seeing her around streams or standing in the middle of streams. And the idea being that if you listen to the water closely, Bricks will really enjoy this. If you listen to the water closely, you can hear her voice along the stream. But her voice runs backwards to the current of the stream. So you will hear it almost as backwards speech. But very interesting stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the other things that was really interesting about it as well is, and this is the kind of archetypal image of the Banshee, is she would be seen as a beautiful woman from the back, beautiful young woman from the back, who's sitting combing her hair. And when somebody would come up and touch her, then the face would turn and it would be a horrifying face or an old face or whatever. And so combs were considered her particular sign. So if a comb was left in your path, you always walked around it. And children, I mean, we got it from our grandparents and our teachers and everything. Never pick up a comb. Now, there's a good folklore reason for that, because a child will pick up a comb and the first thing a child will do with a comb is comb their own hair. And so you get all kinds of transfers of, you know, the things you don't want, lice and bugs and scabies and all of those kind of things that children love sharing with each other. I had a teacher years ago who used to say that a class of primary school children is just a petri dish in 3 dimensions, you know, passing everything to each other. So it made perfect sense because a comb was actually quite a valuable thing years ago. They would be carved out of bone or out of metal. They were passed down in the family. They were considered quite precious things. My grandmother had a famous, what they called a vanity set, which was a beautiful tortoiseshell comb, brush and mirror. And they've been passed down the family forever and ever. But again, a comb was considered her particular piece. So if a comb was found on a doorstep, or if you opened your car door and went to step out and there was a comb exactly where you were going to step, that was considered a sign the Banshee was around and one needed to be careful, either for yourself or for your neighbor. And the combs would just be left there. They wouldn't be picked up. They wouldn't be disposed of. It was a case of, well, I'm not touching it, you know, leave it be. And the other thing that the Banshee could appear in was a mirror. So this is one of the things around covering mirrors, and especially one of the customs was if you were in bed, you shouldn't be able to see into a mirror while you're lying down, because things could come out of the mirror or you could see things moving in the mirrors. So mirrors often were covered or movable or were on the inside of wardrobe doors and things like that. You closed the wardrobe and stuff, or you closed curtains around the bed when that was going on. But one of the things that I was doing a little bit of research for this meeting because it had been a while since I read up on the Banshee, and this completely blew me away, which is the Banshee was known in certain areas of the country for leaving handprints on doors and windows.
Wow.
And also for leaving handprints on people. So this is an actual account from Galway in 1937. He says, Thomas Hart's uncle, whoever he was coming home late from out courting this night. And courting, by the way, meant courting with a lady. And it was a bright night and the moon was high in the sky. Outside his house was a green flag. So he was a noble family, one of the ancient Irish family. And the flag is there to this day. When he was coming in near his home, didn't he see a woman on the green flag? He thought it was some neighbouring woman that was there, and that she was trying to knock a start out of him. So one of the neighbours trying to frighten him or whatever. Over he goes, and he clapped his hand on her shoulder. The very minute he did, and this was obviously recorded orally, the very minute he did, God bless us and save us all, and may everyone be well where it is told. She raised her hand and caught him by the crown of the head and lifted him clear off up the road. And she hit him down against the ground again, but she didn't kill him. He got a terrible fright, and may God bless us and save us all. When he got up in the morning, the print of her 5 fingers was on the top of his head, and his hair had turned as white as the snow from the dent of the fright. So there's a lot of these kind of stories of the handprint being left behind, and particularly where people had doubted that it was the Banshee that they had encountered. So either the print left on the door or left on a window. Sometimes you have stories of people being in the house at night and seeing a woman just pass by the window outside. And when they go to look, there was nobody there, but there would be a handprint on the door. And that was a sign that death was coming within 24 hours. Oscar Wilde is one of the most famous Banshee, I suppose, listeners. When he was a child, he had the experience of all night hearing what he thought was somebody torturing an animal outside. And he called for his mother and said to her, and the Wildes were very, very involved in folklore and all of that. Lady Wilde was a great folklore collector herself. And he begged his mother to go out and rescue whatever animal it was that was being tortured. And she couldn't hear anything. So she told him just to go back to bed and not to worry. And the following day, they had word that a relative of theirs over in England had died. And this is one of the interesting things with it, is that it travels with the families.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to other places. It doesn't matter how far you go, how many countries you go to or whatever, it travels with you. And it always reminds me of that famous folkloric story of the family who were being tormented by, they had a house spirit that they had placated and had done wonders for them, but then they forgot to feed it and it began to cause chaos. And so they decided they would leave the house. And when the man had the whole house packed up on his donkey and was heading down the road, he met one of the neighbours. The neighbour said, "Where are you going to?" And they heard the voice of the spirit say, "Oh, we're heading over to Galway."
Mm.
At that point, the guy just turned around and went back because he was like, "There's no point, it's coming with me." And you'll find that story repeated in various places at various times.
Well, I will
So I
say
did-
there's a whole chapter in my book on banshees. So
There we go.
They came to
That's-
Pennsylvania with people too. Yeah.
And they're still around. One of my uncles to this day absolutely swears blind he saw her. And a relative passed away shortly after. He was, as a young man, he got up in the middle of the night and didn't know what had woken him or startled and looked out the window. And there was a lady in white outside. Again, all he could see was the back of her, but could hear the noise, could hear the wailing, and went to wake his aunt. He was staying with the aunt and uncle at the time. And she sat up in the bed and listened for a while. And she told him, just go back to bed and don't worry about it. And so he went back to bed, and next morning everything was fine. But 2 days later, they got a message from, I think from England, to say that a relative had died. And you still remember that nobody was surprised. You know, they were just waiting for who would it be.
Wow.
So it's there. And the last piece on the Banshee, I think, which is really interesting, is that you have these two archetypal images. The beautiful young woman in white, who usually has kind of golden hair and a long cloak and all of that, and is seen off in the distance. But also the little grey woman. When it's the little grey woman, it's very often described as emaciated and deformed. And I often wonder, is that more the kind of a archetypal grey-like image
Yeah.
being in that? Though often the word grey in old literature just meant it was a kind of a coverall word for anything to do with fairies. The grey lady, the grey horse, the grey whatever, you know. So that's the female side of the death omens. And the other one, which is kind of local, but again would have parallels with things like the Wild Hunt and that kind of stuff, was what was known as the Cush the Bower, or the Dead Man's Coach. And this was a coach that would fetch up outside a house, making all kinds of noise, usually on a very stormy night. And the master of the house would go out to see what visitor had arrived, and he wouldn't be able to see even the coachman properly. And if he knocked on the door of the coach, the door would open and somebody inside would throw blood out over the guy who had answered the door. And that was a sign that blood was now on the house. A soul was being demanded. And usually at that point, they would realize that the actual coachman, the guy driving the coach, was the Dullawan or the Dullahan, which was a headless person. He was often, his name is often anglicized into Gankin, but it actually means Gon Kian, without a head. So again, you have this headless idea. And sometimes the horses that drew it were either invisible or were headless themselves, or there would only be parts of them would appear. So this usually came with thunder and lightning, was considered a very stormy night. And it only took the souls that were kind of in real trouble. So it was kind of that there was blood on you. There was a blood debt of some description and you were being called for. And that's the kind of more masculine side of things. But it certainly goes with kind of the Wild Hunt legends and idea.
I mean, that was terrifying. Like, if you can imagine, that is terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The Banshees would certainly be frightening, but there's a
Yeah.
sort of a elegant calmness to it, in a sense. You know, she's there, she's delivering a message.
Yeah.
You know,
And again, it was seen very much as an emissary from the other world who was giving respect to a particular family to let them know that they could prepare themselves for it. So in that sense, even though it was seen as spooky or scary to come across because you didn't know who was going to die, it was also one of the more kind of reverent, or it was given great respect and great reverence, whereas the other thing was just chaotic and dark that arrived in that way. The third big one, I suppose, and it's still kind of spoken about to this day, were what were known as fetches. And fetches were basically a doppelganger, where somebody would meet either a person who seemed perfectly alive and then would discover, oh no, they died a couple of days ago, kind of a crisis apparition sort of a thing. Or they would meet a doppelganger of themselves, and that would usually mean you were being warned, you were on the way out. And so there's a huge amount of parallels there right across even the Swedish-Danish lore around what's it called? The visitor who arrives, hearing somebody arrive before they arrive and all of that.
Yeah. I always draw a blank on the name.
Me too. It's one of those ones that every time I hear it, I know it, but unfortunately, when I go looking for it. But this was very particularly Irish, which was the idea that the dead were around and that for about a month after they died, they were still very palpable. The presence was palpable, and they would often turn up to visit places that they had been before, or to kind of, if they'd unfinished business of some description. And that's why I was very interested in the conversation you had in the last episode about the lady who was turning up to show where money was, you know.
Yes.
There are a lot of stories around people turning up to say to the son or to the daughter or whatever, listen, I buried the money there, or the deed for the farm is actually here, or whatever it might be. And there was a fasting thing that people would do where they would fast for 2 or 3 days for the relief of the soul, and they would have masses said, but also so that the soul could visit them in their dreams and it was kind of a sort of tuning in to the other side to allow them to come through in their dreams. But that's why there was the idea that after 30 days or so, after a month or so, the person moves to the next level beyond, and it's much harder to make contact. And so you would have the month's mind, which was mass offered or a prayer gathering, but usually the mass offered 1 month after the person had died. Now, it had practical reason, which was in those days, by the time news got out that someone had died, if relatives were traveling, there was a second celebration a month later to be able to remember the person. But it was also more of the idea that this was the final farewell. This was people returned to kind of work and things like that after the month. And we were sort of handing them over into the mercy of God then at that stage. And they continued to be remembered and prayed for, of course, in the family. But one didn't expect manifestations as often. There were manifestations after a month. Then often a priest would be brought in or somebody would be brought along to assist in kind of laying the ghost to rest at that point. So all kinds of manifestations were expected. I mean, I know families who will tell you that the clock always stops, you know, or a picture jumps off the wall, or light phenomena would often happen. I had a funny one even in my own family. My mother, after she passed away, God bless her, she lived with my sister for the last year or so of her life. And every night she used to say to her son-in-law, my brother-in-law, Paul, she would tell him, did you put the security lights on? It became a thing between them, almost kind of a jokey thing, you know, did you remember to put the lights on? And after she had passed, it was the night of the funeral, we were back in the house, and Paul kind of jokingly said, you know, round about now she'd be telling me to put the lights on. And all the security lights just came on, bang. But so he was very taken aback. Myself and my sister kind of laughed about it because those kind of things are common enough in our family. But it got to the point where after 3 or 4 days, he removed the fuses from the lights because it had happened every evening.
Wow.
And it happened more time with the fuses out. And then that was the end of it then at that stage. So she was certainly letting him know that she was around, keeping an eye. So, I mean, that kind of familiarity with the language of death, and we would often speak in Ireland, you would speak about reading a death. The idea that the way the person died, the date that they died on, the hour that they died at, wherever the Saint's Day it was, we've spoken before here, things like known as the Christmas invitation, the idea that anybody who died between All Hallows Eve and Christmas Day was considered, or over the 12 days of Christmas was considered very, very special, that they were given a particular privilege to die in those kind of sacred days when the worlds are closer together. So yeah, there were lots of ways of kind of encountering the other world and recognizing that there is a language between this world and the next that we can learn and that we can kind of go with. Yeah.
There's this sort of idea in, we'll call it pop psychic culture, that if you dream of a loved one after they passed, that's the sign that they're crossing over. And you wonder if it has roots in that idea that you were talking about, where you were literally fasting in order to have this contact with them.
Yeah, yeah. So again, this wasn't seen as kind of seancing or conjuring or whatever. Rather, it was saying, well, look, I will make myself open in a sacred way, you know? And so if there is something that needs to be heard or some kind of a message that I need to receive, then the idea was that in dreams, it was a sacred space. And you'll often find this within, say, within Islamic culture, for example. In Islamic culture, they believe that ghosts that appear externally are not actually ghosts. They're not the spirits of the dead. They're things that are taking on the spirits of the dead, jinn and things like that. But they say in the dream space, that's where we receive our loved ones. That's where we can receive it. The Eastern Orthodox would say the same, and the Taoist tradition says the same, that the true contact between the dead and the living take place in the dream world, not in this world. Because, again, the problem we always have in this world is whatever something says it is, well,
right.
you know, so you always, everything is taken with oceans of salt, whatever something is telling you it is. And that's one of the big difficulties with a lot of the kind of celebrity exorcist culture that's going on at the moment, which is stuff within exorcisms is being spoken of as though this is de facto truth. When actually what you're dealing with is something that of its very nature, if it is diabolical, of its very nature is the liar, you know? I mean, this is why the most ancient advice, and it's common in all the religions, but specifically speaking from my own tradition, was no dialogue, or if there is dialogue, you don't start basing your life on what you're being told.
Right.
Which is
And I would say it, probably all diabolical things lie, but there's also things that lie that maybe aren't diabolical, but they're still lying because they want your attention or whatever else they were getting from you. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, look at human beings. Let's start with that. So, I mean, start with that even. So there's all of that. And then there's also the whole thing of just the kind of trickster stuff, which we've talked about before in terms of how it wants attention. So it'll tell you what you want to hear until it's not getting the response it wants, and it'll switch it around and often cause division between groups because, again, a lot of these groups fall apart and begin to fight with each other that are kind of investigating this kind of stuff. And I think a lot of that is down to the fact that, okay, actual different perception may be taking place, the famous white Bigfoot, black Bigfoot, no Bigfoot store. Yeah. Or you might be getting the idea that, well, if you're all getting on really well, it's peaceful. The emotional energy is peaceful. And what I need is agitation to be brain stuff. So we'll set one against the other. One of the interesting things as well in the Irish fairy lore, which I really thought about, and it kind of comes into some of the Big Philip stuff and some of the other stuff that you're doing, is this idea that if you want to perceive what the other is perceiving, you must make physical contact with that person. So they had, in the idea of the fairy seer, for example, was that if the fairy seer could see and you were standing beside them, you couldn't see. If you put, let me get it right, if you put your right hand on their right shoulder and your right hand on their right shoulder, and then your right foot on their left foot, you should be able to see what they're seeing.
Oh, wow.
Now, that could be as simple as geographically you're coming very close together.
Right. Yeah.
You see from exactly the same. And you've spoken before about how even light phenomena can look differently a few feet away. But they had this idea, and even there was one lovely one they had. One custom was that the fairy seer, whoever the person was seeing, should put their hand on their hip, and the other person should try and put their face in the circle.
Oh,
that's
hagstone, yeah.
Hagstone, exactly. You're making your own hagstone there, and that's. There was, even in the days of horse riding, they had this idea that if you wanted to see what the fairy seer was seeing, if the fairy seer was on its horse, you should go up close and put one hand on the horse's mane and one foot in one of the stirrups, and then you'd be able to see. So again, it was this idea of physical proximity. You're entering some kind of a field, whether it's geographical, emotional, psychical, whatever it might be, but it gives you the perception of what the other is perceiving, or at least a better chance at perceiving what's there, you know? And I was fascinated by I know it's patron only, so I'm not going to go into detail and stuff like that, but I was fascinated by listening to some of the Big Philip stuff, in that there's a heck of a lot happening there.
Yes.
It's very parallel to a lot of the fairy lore stuff. And that's maybe as much as I'll say. But yeah, interesting to hear some of that stuff going on.
In my book, so I have a chapter on banshees, and I follow it up with a chapter on this entity or series of entities that were appearing throughout the area, and particularly in the coal region, we had a lot of Irish. They brought a lot of Irish immigrants, a lot of Welsh, Cornish. So it's not specifically that. There were some German immigrants and so forth out there too. So you do have that melting pot. But in the late 1800s, they get this other entity, which some people considered a death omen, some not. It was a woman in black. And they were very specific that the banshee was usually in white or gray, like you said.
Yeah.
And this was a woman in black. Now, the funny thing is there were some bad actors who started taking advantage of this, and there would be men that would put on black dresses to rob people or harass people.
Oh, yeah.
But some of the accounts, these are things that are not human. I mean, they're walking out onto lakes and sinking beneath the water, or they're going into mines and people follow them in and, they can't be found. People are riding on horses trying to catch them. They just can't catch them. So it's this amazing thing. And some people said it was a death omen, some people not. But I was wondering if there was a sort of a parallel in Ireland.
Well, there's the kind of hag idea, that's ubiquitous across every culture, the idea of the female or the mourning, grieving female who can kind of lead one to death. You can think of the Lorena, for example, in the Central American idea. Black being the widow who has lost something in some way or is a spirit of loss. It strikes me that the fading back into walls and lakes and things like that is also very strongly, well, there's two parallels. One is the kind of shadow person stuff, but the other is, it was often the idea that a restless soul or a soul from purgatory, for example, would lead you to the place where it had suffered its own death and would look for kind of prayer from there, that this was what it was doing. But yeah, I mean, it's not distinctive. There's the dark man kind of stuff in the Irish Celtic thing, who was seen as the master of fairies, the kind of lord of the darker seas. So often kind of conflated with the devil and that kind of stuff as well. But I mean, there's the devil stuff, and then there's the much older kind of Celtic stuff of the kind of the lords, the sort of the she lords and ladies, the kind of the high fairies. But yeah, offhand, I can't think of anything except that there are those stories here as well,
right.
Of ladies of the roads. There's a lot of stories of people going along home at night and suddenly discovering there's somebody walking along beside them, a woman, and asking her, does she want a lift? And she'll sit up on the coach beside them, or sometimes just pace them, which is interesting as well. No matter how fast they go, she seems to be walking at an easy level beside them, but they'll ask her up. And there's this thing about her talking about how cold she is, that I can't get heat into me, and wanting to sit by the fire, or somebody knocking on the door and drawing her in, and then she just disappears. Again, they wouldn't have seen that as the banshee. They would have seen that as a soul in distress, or a fairy woman who was in need in some way. So yeah, the normal thing straight away, if anybody said they'd come across a fetch or they'd had anything experience like that, the normal thing straight away was, God bless them, light a blessed candle, say a prayer for them, have a mass said for them. And the advice always was, don't speak about it to the neighbours then. That was the big thing. The idea was that speaking about it, you could either dishonour it, in which way you were taking anger upon yourself, or you were drawing attention. And more stuff would kind of come up around, that you might necessarily want around the house or that, yeah.
Some thoughts I had on it, in the conclusion of the chapter were, this is, late 1800s, this is the time of Victorian mourning, where women put on black dresses to mourn. And this is the place where a lot of, it's a dangerous job in the mines. A lot of men were dying in the mines, so in a sense, it might make, as much as any of this makes sense, it might be a sort of obvious spirit to appear, this sort of mourning woman.
My own great-grandmother, like the custom in those days when her husband passed away, was black for a year and then grey for a year after that, and finally returned to colour 2 years. And I remember asking one old lady about it, and she said the great thing about it was once you had the morning clothes on, the men weren't allowed to bother you. It was one of the great things about it. It gave people the space to mourn. And it also meant that if somebody had an eye on your farm or an eye on your house or an eye on your whatever and would think of kind of proposing or whatever, they weren't allowed to do that for the first couple of years until they were out of the grey.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it often had a practical value as well as a kind of a spiritual significance. And the person would be given, I suppose, great respect that they were in mourning.
Yeah.
You know, that, well, yeah.
Brother Richard, thank you so much.
You are more than welcome, as always. It's always good to share the stories and keep the legends alive along the way. Yeah, just watch out for combs and don't pick berries for the end of the season. You know, that's the two pieces of advice I think we can all agree on, no matter what tradition we come from.
All right. Well, happy Halloween.
You too.
Strange Familiars is brought to you by our patrons. If you like Strange Familiars and you want to help us make the show and get extra content besides, you can become a patron at Patreon. It's patreon.com/strangefamiliars. All of our patrons get commercial-free versions of the weekly shows, plus extra shows every month. We do at least one, sometimes we do more. I did 2 this month for our patrons. Our Patreon patrons also get live streams occasionally. We've only done 1 so far, but that was our initial live stream. We're going to start doing them more often. And they get to participate in an ongoing paranormal experiment. For more information, again, go to patreon.com/strangefamiliars. There's also an option via Apple Podcasts. The program there is called Patron of the Strange, and our Apple Podcast subscribers also get the commercial-free versions of the weekly shows and the bonus shows monthly. Very soon, we'll be activating memberships on YouTube. If you can subscribe on YouTube, that's free. And even if you don't listen to the show there, that would be a big help. You can go subscribe to our channel on YouTube. It's Strange Familiars. And then when we activate memberships, we'll be giving the YouTube subscribers the extra episodes as well. And we're probably going to be doing some live streams, I think John and I, via YouTube coming up. And once again, I'd like to thank all of our patrons, no matter where they're supporting us. Thank you so much. All right, Allison. These don't look like banshees,
Let me see. Not even the one on the right.
but it is a Halloween-themed picture.
It is. It's, I would guess maybe 1940s, maybe early 50s.
Like a Halloween party. Mm-hmm. Got some sort of pumpkin cut out, and you think that's a father and 2 daughters or something like that? Or
That's their business.
yeah. Maybe it's just a very lucky man. No, it's a nice little Halloween party photograph. So that'll be our curiosity this week. And if you go to the show notes, you'll see an image of that. You can click on that. It'll take you to our Etsy shop where you can purchase that and other curiosities of the week. Those that are left, artwork, prints, and originals, including the artwork for tonight's show, which is one of my favorite pieces I've done in a while. I've done a whole series of those kind of handprint pieces.
You did one for me like a long
Ages
time
ago,
ago.
yeah.
Probably 30 years ago, I bet.
Yeah. Maybe before we were married. But I did a whole other series for Strange Familiars, and I meant to continue doing them because of Brother Richard was talking about handprints and banshees and stuff. I thought, that
We should have gotten us his hand
no time.
for him to send a sketch of his hand.
Yeah, exactly. But no, I really like those pieces. At some point, I'm going to collect them all together in a book, all the handprint pieces I've done. I like doing them, too. I find them like really fun to do. It's a really cool format to do.
It's a really nice handicraft.
Handiwork.
Handiwork.
Also at Etsy, Strange Familiars t-shirts, stickers, patches, and more. My books are there. If you get them from us on Etsy, I'll sign them before we even pack them up. You don't even have to ask.
What if you prefer them without?
They can ask to have them not signed. If you don't ask, though, it will come signed. What else is there? Handmade rosaries. I've got a couple handmade rosaries in there yet. They have the antique crucifixes on them from France. These are crucifixes that date from the 1800s. So I made the rosary, but on that rosary is an antique
I looked to
crucifix.
find more of those, and they do not exist.
Yeah, I think I have, besides the 2 that are up there on Etsy now, I think I have 1 of those crucifixes left. So if you want one of these rosaries with the antique crucifixes, act now. Some of my music is up there. Allison has photos and other ephemera up there. Our shop name is Lost Grave. If you go to Etsy, though, and in the search bar you type in Strange Familiars, you should see our stuff come up, and you can get to our store that way. Or there's links at strangefamiliars.com. And in the show notes of almost every episode, I have links to our Etsy shop. While we're talking about merch, I want to thank everybody who ordered the Swamp Creature sweatshirts, the hoodies. Orders are in, and I don't have an ETA yet, but I'm sure Forest Passage Printing will get right on those. Hopefully we'll have them sooner than later. Thanks to everybody who did that. We do still have the Swamp Creature t-shirts, though. If you didn't get a hoodie and you like the design, the t-shirts are there now. You can get the Swamp Creature t-shirts on Etsy and strangefamiliars.com/merch.
Most people don't try to monetize Thanksgiving merch, but maybe...
A Strange Familiars turkey shirt?
Yeah, I mean, like maybe suggested as the perfect shirt for
Okay,
Thanksgiving.
because Swamp Creatures and Thanksgiving, they go together like...
Starting in 2025, you're going to be at the start. Like Elf on the Shelf didn't exist a long time ago,
You're
right?
right, Allison.
So this could be the start of the Swamp Creature at the table.
You're right. Yes. Get your Swamp Creatures for Thanksgiving.
I've been having one. I've been having you at Thanksgiving.
You've had a Swamp
I've
Creature
had
at the table for a long
quite
time.
a few years, so it's time to spread the love.
Whatnot. So, High Strangeness Comics number 2, cover B is my cover. So make sure to order, please. Order cover B, whether you get it from your local comic shop or my local comic shop, which is riverbendcomics.com. He can order it for you. I don't get paid any extra. I've already been paid for this, so I don't get paid any extra. But what I'm trying to do is get more jobs doing comic book covers, which is kind of a dream job for me. Don't worry, it's not going to replace the podcast, but it's something I love to do. So if my cover sells really well, I'm thinking it'll get the attention of the publishers, and maybe I'll get more cover work. That's the goal. So if you can pick up my cover, that's High Strangeness Comics number 2. It has been delayed. It's coming out the week of November 16th. I guess it's the Sunday, so it comes out that. I forget when New Comic Book Day is. Is it Tuesday?
It used to be Tuesday, but I don't know what it is now.
So that would be the 18th, or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
It comes out sometime around then. Mm-hmm. So it's been delayed. I have an essay in there about High Strangeness and Bigfoot, which has more of my artwork. So every issue will have some of my artwork in it, whether you get my cover or not. It'll have some of my artwork, and my essay will be in it. But if you get the one with my cover, get a double dose of Tim doing Bigfoot.
And so John's hosting a Whatnot?
John is hosting a Whatnot show on November 17th. And we're going to hang out all night, and I'm going to do live drawing, and I've done a ton of drawings for this. I've done lots of sketch covers. If you don't know what they are, comic book publishers started making these blank covers that you can take to artists, and they can kind of make an original cover for you. So I've done heavy metal, I've done a few Swamp Things, I've done an Adventure Time, and a Department of Truth, and I'm going to be doing some High Strangeness because they did sketch covers for High Strangeness number 1.
Oh, wow.
So I'll be doing some original covers, comics with original covers by me. I'll have other original art there. I've got some fun stuff I've done that we're just going to be making available that night. I'm going to do some live drawing probably, that night, but we're going to hang out. We'll do a Q&A. It'll be a fun time. So make sure to follow Riverbend Comics on Whatnot and tune in that night. And then
But John does Whatnot shows with comic books all the time.
3 times a week, I think.
Yeah, and he has amazing stuff. So
Yeah,
if you're into
yeah.
comics too, that would be...
Yeah, John's the dude when it comes to comics, and he's great. If you're looking for stuff, talk to John. A lot of times he can turn stuff up for you. Old stuff, new stuff, whatever.
Still looking for my Daredevil number 77.
Are you being serious?
I am. That's the one with the Teardrop Explodes panel.
Oh, okay. Did you tell him you wanted that?
I thought you said you were going to get it for me ages ago. You said you had it on, he had it or something. I've looked it up. It's not an inexpensive book, but I don't care about conditions, so maybe I can find a crappy one.
I'll remind John.
Yeah, I think
that.
it's Daredevil 77.
Hey, John, Allison's looking for Daredevil number 77. I will do that for you. I will make that happen. Actually, probably John will make that happen,
Yeah.
and I'll take credit for it.
Sounds good.
You've known John longer than I have, though.
Yeah, I've known John since the 80s.
You've known John longer than you've known me.
Yeah. I've known
Yeah.
John. I've known John, I think, since the 80s.
Yeah. Maybe you should be talking to John. But no, seriously, sign up for Whatnot so you can follow John there. We have a Whatnot channel too, but we haven't done anything with it. It's there's too much going on between them.
There's a learning curve too, which
There's a learning curve. I really want to get into it, but we just haven't done it yet. And John said he'd help us. And
yeah, he showed us once, but he's so he has such a command over it that I just didn't really feel like I picked up enough of it.
yeah, so we might get there, but like you said, John does at least 3 shows a week. Go check out John and follow John on Whatnot, and then that's going to be a fun night, a fun hangout. I'm excited for that. So, High Strangeness Comics #2, it's coming, but you can still order it, still get. It's cover B is the cover that I drew, and Jesse Hickey did the colors on that. Sometimes I forget to mention Jesse. He's a fantastic colorist. All right, I think that's it. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back soon with more Strange Familiars. Strange Familiars is a production of Dark Holler Arts. Intro and background music is by Stone Breath. If you want to hear more or purchase music, you can go to stonebreath.bandcamp.com. We are on Facebook, facebook.com/strangefamiliars. We're on Instagram @strangefamiliars, one word. For Strange Familiars merch, go to strangefamiliars.com/merch. And strangefamiliars.com has links to everything we do. You can check that out anytime.
Forbade his maidens all that wore gold in their hair to come and go by Carter Hall. The young Tamlin is there. Those that go by Carter Hall, from them he takes a walk. Either their rings or green man's hooves, or else the maiden hair. Janet has kilted her green man's hoof just above her knee. She has gone to Carter Hall as fast as she could flee. Not pour a double rose, a rose but 3 or 4. Went up and spoke this young Tamlin, crying, "Lady, pull no more." Oh, how dare you pull those flowers? How dare you break those wands? Dare you come to Carter Hall without my command? Carter Hall, it is my own. My father gave to me. I will come and go by here without the leave of thee. 420 ladies gay, sitting down at chairs. In and come the fair Janet, I go with child. It is myself to blame. It's not the Lord in all your hall shall give my shout his name. Janet has kilted her green mantle just above her knee. She has gone to Carter Hall to prune the scathing tree. Oh, how dare you pull at her among the leaves so green, for to kill the bonny babe that we got us between. Must tell to me, Tamlin, you must tell to me, were you once a mortal knight, a mortal hall did see? I was once a mortal knight, hunting here you see. I did fall from off my horse, the fairy queen stole me. Pleasant is the fairyland, but strange tale I'll tell, for at the end of 7 years they pay a fine to hell. The end of 7 years they pay a fine to hell. I so fair and full of flesh, I fear it is myself. Tomorrow night is Halloween, the fairy folk to ride. Those that would their true love win, that miles cross they must hide. First you let pass the black horse, then let pass the brown. Run up to the milk-white steed and pull the rider down. First they'll change me in your arms into a fierce adder. Hold me close and fear me not, I'm your child father. Then they'll turn me in your arms into a lion wild. Tight and fear me not, as you would hold your child. Then they'll turn me in your arms into a red hot iron. Hold me close and fear me not, for I will do no harm. Turn me in your arms into some burning lead. Throw me into the old well and throw me in with speed. Lest they'll turn me in your arms into a naked knight. Wrap me in your green mantle and hide me out of sight. So well she did what he did say. She did her true love win. She wrapped him in her green mantle, as blithe as bird in spring. Up and spoke the fairy queen, angrily cried she, once you were my own Tamlin, some lady borrowed thee. If I'd have known of this Tamlin, I'd have cursed thee good. I'd have plucked thine eyes of flesh and put in eyes of wood. If I'd have known of this Tamlin before we came from home, I'd have plucked thine heart of flesh and put in heart of stone.